James Hetfield has spent over 4 decades being one of the most fearless, aggressive frontmen in the history of heavy metal. Millions of fans have watched him command stadiums with total command and total confidence. Then, mid-show, in front of tens of thousands of people, he stopped everything and admitted something almost nobody expected to hear from him. Right before he walked out that night, he told himself, "I'm an old guy, I can't play anymore." That single, honest sentence cracked open one of the most vulnerable moments in modern metal history. Today I'm walking through exactly what happened, what Hetfield actually said, how his bandmates responded in front of the entire crowd, and the bigger, ongoing story of aging, sobriety, and recovery that's been quietly reshaping how Metallica operates. Stick around, because this is a side of James Hetfield most fans have never really seen before. During an emotional performance on tour, James Hetfield did something he almost never does. He stopped the show entirely to speak directly, unscripted, to the audience. He admitted that before he even walked out on stage that night, he was dealing with real, crippling insecurity. In his own words, he'd told himself, "I'm an old guy, I can't play anymore." Think about the context here. This is a man widely regarded as one of the greatest and most physically intense frontmen in heavy metal history. Someone whose entire public persona has been built around power, aggression, and total command of the stage. And in that moment, standing in front of a massive crowd, he chose to admit that the version of himself walking out that night was scared. Not performing scared, actually unsure whether his body could still deliver what fans had come to expect. That kind of honesty doesn't happen often in arena rock, and it especially doesn't happen from artists whose entire brand has been built on projecting strength. What makes this story land even harder is what happened next, both in terms of what Hetfield revealed about his bandmates, and what actually happened live on stage in front of the crowd. Hetfield shared that when he confided these fears to Lars Ulrich, Kirk Hammett, and Robert Trujillo, his bandmates, the people he spent decades of his life on stage and on the road with, they didn't hesitate, they immediately embraced him, telling him directly, "Hey, if you're struggling on stage, we've got your back." That's a meaningful thing to hear from any group of people who've worked closely together for that long, but especially inside a band with as much history, as much internal tension over the decades, and as much public mythology around it as Metallica. This wasn't a vague, generic show of support. It was a direct, specific commitment. If he struggles, they cover for him, together, as a unit. And then it went beyond words. Following his confession, his 3 bandmates walked across the stage and gave him a massive group hug, in real time, in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans. Not backstage, out of view. Right there, in the middle of the show, for everyone watching to see. For a genre built so heavily around intensity and toughness, that public embrace is genuinely rare. It became one of those moments that instantly gets clipped, shared, and remembered. Not because it was dramatic in a theatrical sense, but because it was completely real. This moment doesn't exist in isolation. It connects directly to a much bigger, ongoing story about how Hetfield and Metallica as a whole have been navigating the realities of aging, health, and long-term recovery. Hetfield has spoken openly about the fact that Metallica has, in his words, earned the silver, meaning the gray hair, the physical wear, the accumulated toll of decades spent touring relentlessly. And he's been direct about the practical reality that follows from that. The band simply can no longer tour non-stop for 6 months at a time, the way they might have earlier in their career. Rather than quietly pushing through and pretending nothing has changed, the band has drastically restructured their schedules, specifically to prioritize physical health and family. That's a significant shift for a band whose entire public identity has been built around relentless touring and non-stop intensity. Choosing to scale that back isn't a sign of decline, was Cantonas Tras. Based on how Hetfield talks about it, it's a deliberate strategy to ensure Metallica's actual long-term survival, rather than burning out trying to maintain a pace that made sense decades ago but doesn't anymore. Part of what makes Hetfield's onstage honesty so significant is the broader context of his public journey with sobriety and addiction recovery treatment. A journey that's been misunderstood by fans and media more than once. Whenever Hetfield has stepped away from the band for addiction recovery treatment, breakup rumors inevitably start swirling. It's an understandable reaction. A major band's lead singer disappearing from public view for a stretch of time naturally raises questions. But Hetfield has directly pushed back on that narrative, explaining clearly that his time in recovery is exactly how he protects Metallica's future, not a sign that it's ending. He's described this recovery time as a way to reboot, stepping away specifically so the band can keep creating and keep going. long-term, rather than running himself into the ground and forcing an actual permanent end to the band. That reframing matters. Instead of recovery being treated as a crisis that threatens the band's existence, Hetfield presents it as a deliberate, necessary part of how the band continues to exist at all. Then, in early 2026, Hetfield gave fans a deeply personal update following a successful surgery, thanking a global network of supporters who'd rallied around him during that period. His own words were remarkably humble for someone at his level of fame. "I'm fighting, but I can't do it alone." That's not the language of someone performing strength for an audience. That's someone being honest about needing other people to get through something difficult, publicly, without pretending otherwise. In a tearful interview with CBS Sunday Morning, the now 62-year-old rock icon reflected on what actually pushes him through the ongoing anxiety of performing, even after everything he's shared about his own doubts and fears. His answer wasn't about the size of the crowd, or the roar of a stadium, or any of the typical language you'd expect from a longtime arena performer. He described how simply locking eyes with a single passionate fan somewhere in the crowd fills his heart up and completely recharges him. One person, one genuine connection, in the middle of tens of thousands of people, is enough to pull him through. That detail reframes everything else in this story. The insecurity, the fear of aging out of his own physical capability, the anxiety before walking on stage, all of it gets counterbalanced, according to Hetfield himself, not by external validation at scale, but by small, individual human moments of connection with the people watching him. Ultimately, Hetfield doesn't describe Metallica's legacy purely in terms of records sold or shows played. He describes it as something closer to a massive, safe family of misfits, a community that now spans 3 generations of fans, people who found something in this band's music that made them feel like they belonged somewhere. James Hetfield built a career on projecting fearlessness. What's made him genuinely relatable to millions of fans over the last few years isn't that image, it's the moments where he's set it down entirely. Standing in front of a stadium and admitting, out loud, that he almost didn't walk out that night. Letting his bandmates hug him in front of everyone instead of processing it alone. Being honest that recovery isn't the end of the band, but the thing keeping it alive. At 62 years old, still touring, still fighting through real anxiety before every show, James Hetfield isn't hiding the hard parts anymore. And for a 3-generation family of fans who've grown up with this band, that honesty might be the most powerful thing he's ever given them. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. I'm covering more of these real, honest stories behind music's biggest icons every week. See you in the next one.